Supervisor Mrs. S.E.P.T.A, so you all for coming, and we should turn it on for this presentation.
Okay, thanks, Gina.
Thank you.
All right, it's interesting, and I know we had an initial setup for a board meeting, but we're going to improvise and go with this way. Hopefully it's okay for everybody. Hopefully everybody can see too. I may just try to enlarge things where I need to. I'm really grateful that S.E.P.T.A asked me to come here tonight, and we agreed to do this. This is something that was originated out of the S.E.P.T.A meeting last year on executive functioning. One of the conversations last year, and with respect to executive functioning, is that the very first thing you have to do is be able to emotionally regulate. If you can't emotionally regulate, you cannot engage your executive functioning skills. You can't think practically about what the next thing is that you have to do, or certainly be able to engage in planning. So what we're talking about tonight is emotion regulation. And really specifically, another part of this is trying to bring to parents the exact lessons that we are delivering to students in school. This is in 6th, 8th, and 10th grade. We also do this there are other tools that we use, both in Primrose and SIS. In Primrose, it's more about identifying the feeling that you're experiencing, being able to name the feeling, and then in SIS, they use second step and other strategies to where we've actually aligned them with S.E.P.T.A to see where we have similarities, and essentially a lot of times trying to accomplish the same thing. So I'm grateful again to S.E.P.T.A for having me, and what I'm going to try to do as much as possible is make this just like the lessons that our kids have. So I'm going to ask you to loosen up a little bit and just roll with me. Some of it you may say, oh, I'm way too cool to be doing this, you know, I'm an adult and all this, but I'm going to ask you just to shed that for a few minutes and try your best to engage in this. And I'm also, at the end, we have a brief survey feedback for you to take, just like that's what the kids do after they do their DBT lessons. So, also stealing a page from our executive functioning is to try to get a sense right as we start about what is it going to look like when we're all done here, so you have a sense of where we're going here, that to learn the self-regulation language and strategies, so having that language at home is really important, being able to speak the same language and prompt students about things they've already learned. And what I want more than anything is for you to take home one specific thing. What one thing did really resonate with me that I could do at home tonight? And as I talk to my child, as we come upon different challenges, as I see them having a hard time regulating, what could we do right now? So as we, with our executive functioning, as you'll learn, we work on the get ready, do, done. We start with done. We start with what done looks like, what we need to do. Again, think about actively think as you're listening to this, how could I use this at home? And also too, ask questions as we go along. It couldn't hurt to take some notes as well too. I can share this information with S.E.P.T.A so that you have all the information here, but just to jot notes, either we all know that we remember better when we handwrite things, but if you have to write it on your phone, by all means. If you have your phone out, I won't judge you, think you're on social media. All right, and we talked about the getting ready, so it's just getting into an effective mindset, have something to write. Also too, what we're gonna do right now, and this is what we do with our kids, is take a few minutes to be here. One thing we know is that when we sit down and we start to engage in something, we bring everything that we just brought with us. Whatever thing you were doing at home, whatever conversation you were having, whatever you're going to be doing maybe tomorrow or that you need to do. Maybe you're making that mental list in your head. So we're going to take a minute to be here. So this is a tense and release exercise. All right, so this is the part where you get into this. So the tense and release exercise, and this is what we would ask kids to do, what I'm going to ask you to do right now, find one part of your body, you don't have to announce what that is, and make it as tense as you possibly can, and I'm going to count out the seconds. So you're in your mind right now, what is that part of your body? And I should be seeing close to teeth grinding, but we'll count it out on 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just do 5. And then release it and breathe out. All right? Next one, this is what the kids do as well, brief breathing exercise. We've been taught so many different ways of breathing in terms of why that is effective for us. One of the things that I've looked at is a lot of research on breathing. And my favorite, when I nerd out on my Huberman Lab podcast, if anybody listens to that, what he has pointed out is that the research clearly points out that the way to effectively breathe is just as a baby soothes themselves. And if you think about the way a baby soothes themselves, it's a long inhale through the nose, followed by a short one, and a long exhale. So it's everybody, I'll demonstrate it and then you follow me. Now you. 1, 2, 3, go. Long inhale, short follow, and then long exhale. One of the things that I have a personal frustration with, and we're going to get into this in a minute or a little bit later on, is that we ask kids, or I could sit here asking you as an adult to do something, we're going to get into the science of why you would do that. Don't just sit here and ask me to breathe. Tell me why I would be breathing. Tell me what is happening physically within my system that you're asking me to breathe. And I think if we can give kids that respect and tell them those reasons, I think we'll hook them a little bit better. Sorry, jumping into a million slides here. All right, did I cover everything there? I think so. Nope. Okay. And this is another thing, too, we ask our kids to do is because Lord knows, especially if you look at middle school students and what they've just come from, whatever drama they're engaged in, is to try to picture what they look like when they're totally listening and engaged and to be their best engaged self. So that's what we're looking for here tonight. And as I said, we'll get into more on why we did this. So what is dialectical behavior therapy? By show of hands, how many people have ever heard this before or know anything about DBT? Okay, I'm preaching to the choir. Somebody tell me in your words what DBT is. Don't worry about it. Make a mistake. It's okay. No brave souls. I saw all these hands. Yep, know what it is. No one wants to say.
Self-regulation.
Self-regulation. That's absolutely a big piece of it. Does anybody know what they mean by dialectic? What that is? Okay, so let's start there. So dialectic, that just means that two different truths, even contradictory truths, can be true at the same time. These two things can coexist. This is true for this person, and that is true for that person, and that's okay, that both those things exist. And here's some of the lessons that we do, and you may have seen this before. Can everybody see that picture clearly? Shout out, what do you see? Girl, old lady?
An old lady.
Old lady? Girl? So usually people are either seeing an old lady or a young girl. Who sees the old lady? Okay. So you see the big nose there?
Yep.
Okay. Who sees a young girl? Where do you see the young girl? Anybody? Okay. So the big nose is the chin, right? Those people who saw the old lady, do you see the young girl now? And vice versa? Yes. Feather coming out of the top of her hair. The black is her hair. Okay? Here's a favorite among the kids. All right? What color do you see? Blue. Who sees blue and black? Raise your hands. Who sees white and gold? I do. I do. Yes, I do. I love that response. No, you don't. That is exactly what literally, students will start yelling each other in class saying, why are you lying? You can't possibly be seeing white and gold. That is what my eyes see. I believe I've done a little research. This has to do with optical. It's a whole thing about how light enters your eye. But people will either see blue and black or white and gold. So, and here's a favorite. Two truths existing at the same time. What do we see here? An annoyed son. And how's mom feeling?
So happy.
Yes, so content. Yes. Obviously, you have you have two very different truths happening there at the same time. Although he's probably feeling the same, just doesn't want to show it. All right. So this is the whole notion of DBT. It's dialectical behavior therapy. So dialectical meaning those two truths can exist. Behavior that you have to, any behavior therapy is that your feeling is based on your behavior and the behaviors you learn. As I pointed out from the start, I want to be very, very clear. We are not doing dialectical behavior therapy in schools. This is S.E.P.T.A is a very watered down version to make it accessible to kids and just breaking down the skills. Real DBT therapy takes a seriously trained clinician and years of training and then intense work with clients. This is teaching the most basic skills to all kids, to making sure we always talk about tier 1, which means things that everyone gets. So it's these tier 1 skills for everyone to get, to be able to manage their everyday, for any student to be able to manage their everyday. So it's accepted, it's grounded in accepting, and we're going to get, that's a big word in DBT, acceptance, in these dialectics in a non-judgmental way. a lot of the, even for myself, I'll say this, within DBT, there's a lot of language. And sometimes it takes a while to really, for that really to sink in. And even that, the non-judgmental, is a really sometimes difficult thing to understand. And we're going to hear directly from Marshall Linehan, the person who created DBT, in a few minutes. But I think that in itself is something just to even try to think about. What does that mean, non-judgmental? And how often does that come into my experience? And how does that change the way I think about things and even the way I behave? A lot of times the stories we create in our own head, the narrative, absent any facts, but we create these stories, and all of it is usually based on some initial judgment that we've made that has nothing to do with the facts of what's in front of us. So the idea is we learn specific strategies to reinforce target behaviors to help create a better life experience for ourselves and everyone around us. And this is really what we have to look at, is that the alternative is being stuck in this cycle of unhealthy and unhelpful thinking and behaviors. So it's this balance of acceptance and change. How can we move towards change? And the first thing is acceptance. Again, we'll get into. So some quick examples. Somebody read this out. Let's just take turns. Just start reading it out, hopefully, if you can read it. Can anybody see it? No?
I know I didn't.
Go ahead, Joe.
I know I didn't have your attention when I told you, and you need to listen more carefully.
Okay. Somebody else. Or Jill, you can keep going if you can see it.
I know I haven't done anything to directly address my colleague's behavior, and he is negatively impacting my team's work. I realize I haven't modeled the best social media habits, and my daughter is always on her phone. I get that a lot of our communication involves me telling you what you haven't done, and you're always so defensive.
Last one.
You're a really smart kid, and you need to work a lot harder.
Okay. Just for a minute, I just want everybody just to take a second and just turn and talk. Don't leave anybody out. You see somebody not part of the conversation, talk about what one of those you connect to and how you connect to it. Just I'll give you 1 minute. Go ahead. All right, if we could bring it back together. You'll see one of the biggest, obviously, what does everybody think about the but versus the and? Anybody?
Yeah, it needs to be reversed.
It needs to be reversed. One of the ideas about DBT is remember that two opposing ideas can exist at the same time. Once you throw the but in there, you negate the first half. I'm really sorry I did that, but you haven't done what you need, so you're not really sorry. It's just that, you're just, the focus is on the latter. So anybody want to share anything that you talked about or anything that you specifically connected to? No? Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about like you're a really smart kid and you work a lot harder, like trying to find the balance with your child and knowing like are they really putting their best effort and you want to like make them try harder, but you want to reward them at the same time, especially when they're young.
Right, and what you just said there is hugely important. That was intentional, and where I put that would be terrible language if I was to use that to say you're a really smart kid. All the research shows the outcomes of telling kids that they're smart is awful. They're more and when you look at what the actual research, they're more likely to lie, they're more likely to cheat, they choose less challenging problems. But what the other thing that you said is that working hard, effort, when we praise effort, that is tremendously meaningful, especially when we're specific about the effort. The outcomes are so much different that they will try harder things, that they'll be more honest, that they'll continue to try harder. And each one of these is, yes, trying to find the balance. And even if you said that, you're really doing a good job, and you need to do this. It's accepting the fact that both are there, and we can work within both, rather than negating somebody's. When you throw in, it sounds very simple, but when you throw in the but, you negate that whole first part of it. And that's the whole idea, is to be able to, the whole idea in this, and I really like this idea, is that am I being effective? Am I more focused right now on being effective or being right? And so many of us can get into that trap, myself included, where you get caught in this cycle that I want to be right here. And once you're caught there, you're no longer effective because you haven't accepted those two truths. So this is our text that we work from. To be quite honest with you, we don't use literally the text that often. The text we use as a guide. This DBT Steps-A. Liz and Jim Mazza are two, they're a husband and wife team that are psychologists who out of Seattle. And actually Jim Mazza had done a session with us a few years ago, a wellness summit a few years ago, to talk about this text that they created. Alec Miller, he's right down in White Plains at, what's his company? Who knows that? Cognitive, yes, thank you. So, and they do trainings in school as well too. These are what we focus on. These are the areas. If you can't read that, it's dialectics, mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. So those are the 5 things. Again, if you can't see that, it's dialectics, those two truths existing, mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. And I'll explain, I know that's very jargony, but I'll explain them in a minute. So at SMS, we have Health 6 and Facts 8, and they break it down into what we've trimmed it down to is mindfulness and dialectics. That's in one lesson. The tip skill, I'll explain what that is. Check the facts and opposite action. And at the high school, through wellness, just through health, we have dialectics, mindfulness and wise mind, check the facts, wave skill, and something called Dear Man. And I'll explain all these. And as I mentioned before, we try to incorporate the why whenever we're doing this. So they may not get into that in the text about why we're doing certain things, but we certainly get into it when we're presenting these lessons. So this is, let's see, hopefully this will work. So this is Marsha Linehan. She is the one who created DBT, and I thought, why not hear directly from her as far as, and she created this to treat her own mental health. I believe she was bipolar, depressed, and she did a lot of work on herself and has now brought this to us. And just so while you're watching it, just look for one idea that interested you, or challenge your thinking, and think about what you could take from that to improve your own effectiveness. Let's see.
In our current research, we are finding that the skills that are taught in dialectical behavior therapy may be the most critical parts of the entire treatment. The skills that we teach are in 4 groups. So the first group is mindfulness skills. DBT was actually the first psychotherapy that put mindfulness into psychotherapy. We did not put meditation into it because most of our clients really could not tolerate focusing on their breath and doing meditation. So what I did was, for mindfulness skills, what I did was to translate Zen mindfulness practice into behavioral language. I said to myself, what were my teachers really teaching me to do? And then I packaged those and taught them to the patients. That's mindfulness. Those are the core skills, and every other skill depends on those skills. So they're the first ones everybody gets. The first skill is observing. So it's just learning the skill of noticing, paying attention, noticing what's in front of you, noticing what's within you, noticing what's in your mind, noticing what's in your body, and noticing what's outside. That's the skill of observing. That's central to all contemplative practices. Second one is describing, where you describe what you observe. The basic idea is you can't describe what you didn't observe. Meaning you cannot describe what's in someone else's mind, among other things. And the third one is participating. This really comes straight from Zen. It's the skill of becoming one with. It's the skill of throwing yourself in, letting go. So it's going with the flow, so to speak. So that's what you do. Then the question is, how do you do it? So the way you do it, first, is non-judgmentally. Non-judgmentally means neither good nor bad. He's not judging. The second is in the moment. It's paying attention to just this one moment. Primarily because that's all that exists. It's my favorite skill at the moment because I love thinking about the idea that nothing exists but this one moment. The third is effectively. That comes straight out of Zen. And effectively means doing what works and giving up having to be right all the time. So it's instead of being right, being effective.
Okay. So that's a little bit of what I was talking about in terms of the mindfulness, especially too. A lot of our kids, they may have practiced mindfulness in some classes or in different situations. And some kids, it's a lot of times too, I'll ask, so if I say the word mindfulness, give me the first word that comes to your mind. Some kids have like a visceral reaction to it, a negative reaction. Other kids are very, very much like it. I find with most kids, they don't know why they're doing it, what the purpose of it is. And DBT mindfulness is also very different. I think the traditional mindfulness is wonderful for a lot of people, and for a lot of people, they're just not very good at it, myself included. I would probably actually fall asleep when I do it. DBT mindfulness is very different. It's just about being present. You could think about this, especially too, when a student's taking a test. We always talk about, are you there answering those questions, or are you thinking 10 steps ahead or 10 steps behind? That's a huge question, and mindfulness, according to DBT, is just being here and being present. And she talked about the non-judgmentally too. It's about just that it happened. I'm just seeing the fact of what happened. I'm not attaching a judgment to what happened. And then this is a concept that a lot of our kids very quickly latch onto, especially because they realize, especially when they're in emotion mind, that they're really usually in a less than effective place. So hopefully this will work again too.
So in general, when I'm teaching, the first skill I always teach is the skill of wise mind. And the skill is based on the basic belief that all people have within themselves the ability to be wise. And what you're going to be doing is simply teaching clients how to find their own wisdom. Now, besides wise mind, I have two other kinds of mind. Reasonable mind is when a person is only paying attention to reason itself. How you feel doesn't matter, what you want doesn't matter, what you're hoping for doesn't matter. None of that matters because what they're looking for is what the facts are. Now we can go right across and run into emotion mind. What I mean by emotion mind is when you overdo emotions. This is when you're being completely controlled by emotions. So now we're going to move to what is wise mind. Wise mind includes the synthesis of both of those, and it's based on the idea that everyone has the capacity for wisdom.
That's a real simple idea, I think, for most kids, and they can connect to it pretty easily, and especially they can think of, especially in a lot of situations where they were not being particularly thoughtful about somebody else, or their emotions were running way too high. Usually it's the latter, where kids have emotions that are running way too high and they're acting just based on those emotions. So these are examples of some of the things we do in our lessons. So we talk to them about this whole idea of mindfulness, and if you can't focus on the present, what could be a problem? If you couldn't be focused right on the present, what could be a problem? Kids come up with great answers to this. This was a lesson from middle school. This is using the example of the quarterback who's, the homecoming football game, go Tuskers, and the whole school is excited for the big win. Players are on the field, very excited and motivated to win. The team is down by 10 points. The quarterback has been sacked 4 times and has thrown 1 interception. So what happens if the quarterback is only in emotion mind, if he's only in reasonable mind? What do we want from our quarterback for the big game? What do you think he would do if he was in wise mind? Athlete, whether you're an athlete, we talked about this last year at the middle school, especially around the play. If you have to go on stage and perform, you have lines, and you are ruled by your emotion in that moment, you are not going to be effective. You're not effective at all. And again, that's what this is all about. It's about how can I be most effective. And this is what we get. This is another example of a lesson we do about how we get into the how-to. We talk about it, but then get to the how-to. And to become initially, just obviously be aware of when you're in a cycle of extreme thinking. And again, this is about the buts. I appreciate your help yesterday, but what you were saying didn't make sense to me. And this is, again, just reinforcing how to be aware of our thinking and how to be aware of when we are negating considerations that could change our perspective and change our mood and our emotion. All right, so this is these are the ideas, but then how do you do it? This is where we start, the tip skill. This is the very first lesson we do in the middle school, the tip skill. We talk to kids, and just real quickly again, just talk to your neighbor. When you're most nervous, when you're anxious, or when you're starting to heat up, what do you feel like? How would somebody know that you are in a heightened emotional state, whether it's anxious, fearful, stressed, nervous? Go ahead, I'll give you 1 minute. All right. Any unusual expression or feeling that anybody had that you wanted to share? What do you got? You don't want me to know. I don't think I want to ask. So this is what our students are saying. And this is what we show our students, this picture, and they will come up with this. They know it. They know how they feel. They know when they're at their worst, and they'll start shouting these out about exactly what happens for them. Very frequently, two of the most common things we see when kids are very anxious, it's stomach aches and headaches. Those are the two most common things that we see among students when they're anxious. We have to realize that our body, and we're going to get into that in a little bit too, our body is always trying to tell us something. And really and we get into that in the lesson with them too, that it's just this notion that it's a hypersensitive alarm bell that's going off and saying, there's danger here, and and that's what we call it, like a sensitive alarm system on your house. All right? So this is what TIP stands for: temperature change, intense exercise, paced breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. You already did the breathing, and you already did progressive muscle relaxation. So you already have two of them down pat already, and you haven't even learned this yet. So you're way ahead of the game. The intense exercise, I'm not going to ask you to do that, but we do have the kids stand up and just start sprinting. They either sprint in place or do jumping jacks for the point of understanding why they're doing this, what's happening in their body. The temperature change is a really neat one. And I'll be very honest with you, when I first saw this, I was like, come on, give me a break. Temperature change? You're supposed to literally put your face in ice. But there's science behind it. It has the same effect as if you fall under the ice, and I did not know this previously, your body goes into a self-preservation mode, and your body will shut down. It's not a conscious thing, it just will do it. And you can stay submerged for far longer than you would if you were conscious. It's just to preserve you. The same thing happens when you put your face in ice. Your body starts shutting down in terms of those emotional signals, and those signals that you need to pump blood. When you get excited, saying, send blood to all these areas. You need more oxygen. That is saying, slow down. You need less blood, you need less oxygen. You're okay. So a lot of times too, and we share this with our school nurses too, student comes in, stomach ache, headache, that doesn't mean they don't have a stomach, but if you're coming in every day with those same symptoms, here's an ice pack, head between your knees, just put the ice pack on your face. I can't tell you how many times I've used that as well at home. And when somebody's really in an intense spot, when this person can get to the point where they just say, you know what, I'm really feeling lousy, let me just put an ice pack on my face and I'll just reboot myself. It's a really effective strategy. So what we get into here, what you're trying to do with the tip skill is interrupt emotion mind. So you're racing, your body's pumping oxygen, blood. You're saying, how do I interrupt this? How do I stop this? Because you can't get into logical thinking if you're in this state. So we explain to students what exactly, let's see if this will work. Yes, here.
No matter what you're a fan of, you can probably think of two characters who fit the description. Holmes and Watson, Brennan and Booth, Kirk and Spock, Ron and Hermione. They're close, they understand each other in ways that others don't, and you really can't picture one without the other. But when stuff happens, they usually react in different ways. Like if you're snooping around Hogwarts at night and you come across some beastie, the smart money's on Hermione to come up with a spell that saves the day, while Ron probably standing there with his mouth open. And when Sherlock starts to go crazy because there hasn't been a fiendishly clever jewel heist or whatever for him to figure out, you can count on Watson to calm them down. Mostly. My brother John, who is a writer of books, will tell you that these characters are foils. They're not opposites exactly, they're contrasts. And the more you see them together, the more they seem to complement or round one another out. And that is basically your autonomic nervous system in a nutshell. Your autonomic system is the branch of your peripheral nervous system that regulates the functions of your internal organs, like your heart and stomach, and also controls your smooth and cardiac muscles and your glands. All things that you do not consciously control, so yes, you could say it has a lot of power over you. But the funny, or maybe confusing thing about this system is that its effects on your organs and muscles and glands are by no means consistent. Not at all. At any given moment, whether you happen to be totally relaxed or completely flipping your wig, your autonomic system is constantly making involuntary, fine-tuned adjustments to your body based on what signals your central nervous system is picking up. This could be changing your body temperature, sending extra blood to a particular area, slowing your heartbeat, or tweaking your stomach secretions. Its effects change depending on the situation you're in, and also which part of your autonomic system is in charge at that moment. Because this weird little corner of your nervous system that keeps you alive is actually run by two competing interests. Two divisions that serve the same organs, but they create opposite effects in them, battling it out back and forth to either excite your body's functions or subdue them. One of them is dedicated to amping you up and preparing you for activity. That's your sympathetic nervous system. And the other one talks you down and effectively undoes what its foil did. And that is the parasympathetic nervous system. Together, they are what make your body experience stress, fear, relaxation, and defiance, courage and cowardice, panic, and peace. If there's an epic novel going on in your body right now, it is probably being written by these two.
So it's nice for kids to be able to understand there's a reason behind this and what exactly is happening in my body. And so right now, just want to take a quick temperature check of the room as far as anything that's confusing so far that I need to rewind and go back to, because I know we've already covered a lot. And I'm curious to the impact on behavior and learning, if you think about this, and not if, but when our kids are experiencing extreme emotions. Because everyone will experience these extreme emotions, and then the other part too is, how does our own emotional experience affect us as parents and what we give off? And if we cannot self-regulate and we're not being aware of how we're coming across, what is the impact on our kids? I think that's a really important question. It's about not only how to help them, but how to help us to model. I really like that. There was one of those end and but lines, and the focus there was, I really want my daughter to be on social media less, but I'm not modeling the best behaviors. We see so much data about kids and social media, but I don't see any real difference between the kids' behaviors and a lot of adult behaviors too. So the same thing goes for how we model emotional regulation ourselves. And it's work. It is real work. So what we talk to the kids about is, do I need to stop? Any specific point of clarity needed? Okay. We ask them, so what is it that drives an emotion? What is it that drives our emotion? Is this what we think drives our emotion? The situation creates the emotion? And I can make this bigger. Here we go. I got skills. All right. Situation or event, but it's the thought and internal dialogue that determines the emotional response. So it's how we think about these things and how we talk about them. Great example I remember using with a middle school group is when you walk in late to class. If you're the person walking in late to class, what internal dialogue do you have in your head? What are the thoughts that you're creating about, that you're ascribing to everybody in the room? She's thinking this, he's thinking that. Oh, they're all staring at me. Oh, this is happening, that's happening. And it's just a crescendo of thoughts. Then if you ask them to switch, you're the student in the room. Now, what are you thinking when that person walks in late? I'm not thinking anything. Or maybe I think, wow, I wonder where he just was. And that's the end of it. But so it's the emotion that person walking in late is feeling is completely driven by what their whole internal thought, dialogue, and that dialogue can go deep. When you talk to kids about what they're thinking about during a test, I mean, I know kids who stop during a test, they're thinking about what their average is going, what they're going to get in this test, and what their average is going to be. I can remember years ago a young lady telling me, well, that's going to determine what college I go to, what kind of husband I meet, what my kids will be like, where we'll live. That happened all during the span of that test? Oh yeah, yeah. So obviously, in that situation, you're being far less than effective. There's no way she's doing her best on that, demonstrating her knowledge as best as she can. So the whole idea here too is when we did those tip skills, when we were able to lower our temperature, then we can actually engage ourselves and check the facts. This is what check the facts is about. And again, this goes back to freeing ourselves of judgment. I love this image. Whoop, maybe not that skilled. Are we seeing the facts in front of us or judgments that we've created? For a lot of kids, especially, this comes down to self-talk. There's a lot of kids, when something happens, the self-talk that they give to themselves is brutal about how terrible they are, about how horrible they are. And this is the parallel. It's that it's a terrible court case. You have an unbelievable prosecutor and a judge, and there's no defense. There's no defense attorney there. A lot of us will say, oh man, I was awful at that, but then you'll pick yourself up and say, you know what, though, I'm really good at that. I'm okay, I'm really good at this, and you'll have that internal defense attorney. A lot of our kids don't have that. And we have to, even when they're looking at other students and when they're talking about other students, it's this whole idea, and I love that, if you can't see that line, there's a story behind every person, there's a reason why they're the way they are. Think about that before you judge someone. The other thing, then we move on to treat your thoughts as a hypothesis and not a fact. This is a huge one. If you remember I said at the start, a lot of times you might hear something and it doesn't mean anything to you. I always used to think in terms of sports. I remember a coach trying to tell me forever how to throw a curveball. I couldn't figure out how to do it. But then when you feel it, you're like, oh, there it is. It's the same thing with some of these ideas. Treating your thought as a hypothesis. The question is how many times have you had a thought, and because you've had a thought, you've judged yourself based on that thought? All this is trying to teach our kids is that you just let go. You had the thought, you let it go. Just because you have the thought just makes you human. That's not who you are. If you act on a thought, that's a different thing. But having the thought in itself is not a reason to judge yourself. Talking to kids about that takes a little bit to sink in. And I know for some kids it passes over, and it's something that we just have to keep going over and over again with them. This is about, and then checking the facts is this. Just like I was talking about walking into the classroom, is that what you really saw? Is you're only creating a narrative behind what you exactly saw. So what's the emotion I'm experiencing that I want to change? This is when we check the facts. What is the event prompting my emotions? You're going backwards here, building backwards. What did I specifically observe? Only what you saw. You can't make up something that wasn't there. You can't say, I feel this way because of that. Was there that? Did you see that? Did you experience that? Can you speak to that? And then does my emotion fit the facts? Is this balanced? Is how I'm reacting right now, does that fit the situation? Some simple things that we could say is, what's the worst thing that could happen? How likely is that to happen? When you ask kids about the things that could happen, they will come up with fantastic things. Especially too, and it's one of the toughest things, is kids who have such high academic expectations of themselves, and they'll say, well, I'll fail the test. How many tests have you failed this quarter? None. How many tests did you fail last year? None. Or, I failed the test, and then what? Does the world come to an end? Does everything stop? It's really fast when you ask when you present it that way. Sometimes even adults, when they're really anxious, I'll say to them, you know what? No matter what, you're going home tonight. You're going to lay your head on your pillow, and you're going to wake up tomorrow morning. So either way, no matter what we do, it's just whether or not we're going to be effective when we try to do what we have to do. And then opposite action. Opposite action is fun. It's that whatever your impulse is telling you to do right now, just do the exact opposite. I can remember before I knew even anything about DBT, when I first started off as a counselor, kids who would be having chronic battles at home with their parents. And I used to say, have you ever thought of just in the middle of one of these fights, because you're in the same cycle. Everybody knows their role. You're supposed to say this, then they're supposed to say that, and everybody gets into the fight. Just go give them a hug and tell them you love them, just to mess with them. But in reality, what that is that opposite action. So if I'm having this social drama and my response is to retreat, Let me do the opposite. Let me do the opposite of what I would normally do. If anybody's a Seinfeld fan, it was very effective for George. But there's a real, like our normal response, anger, our normal response would be to attack, sad, withdraw, scared, avoid. So instead, just do the opposite of what your emotion is telling you to do. All right. This is where we do the wave at middle school. We don't do Dear Man at the middle school. That's a high school only thing. And even when I'm going to be observing a couple of our counselors doing the Dear Man lesson in a little bit, we don't focus as much on the acronym. The acronym, if you can't see that, it's describe, express, assert, reinforce, be mindful, appear confident, and negotiate. That's a lot. That's a lot. Essentially, what you're doing here with Dear Man is just helping kids to prepare for meaningful conversation. If they want something, how can I meaningfully communicate this? How can I know exactly what I want? When I go talk to you about, and there's great examples our kids have given about arguing about curfews. If I know I want to stay out a little later, you want me home earlier, how do I go into this conversation? What am I willing to give up here? And how can I communicate to you what I really want and hear you at the same time? Versus just coming in with a head full of steam and yelling and arguing or whatever it might be. But that's essentially what Dear Man is about. It's about learning. It's a strategy to help us. And that's that interpersonal skill about how I can negotiate with this. And it's not, it can sound like, oh, you're trying to, is it used car sales? But no, it's that you're trying to figure out how to effectively communicate what you want and what you need. For a lot of kids, that's a conversation. That could be a conversation with a teacher as well. I can't tell you how many kids go into conversations really ineffectively with teachers, and it's just something that they have to learn. Something also too that we as parents have to learn to coach them to go do rather than doing for them, because otherwise then they don't develop that skill at all. If you don't practice it, you don't develop it. There's an assertiveness skill to it as well, about being clear about what is okay and what's not okay. And that can help them very much in social situations as well too. Just an example of an activity. So what happens is that we have our kids actually break down into pairs and they role play different scenarios that they've come in so that they can practice that skill and practice and then other kids will comment on it and say, hey, it wasn't really clear what you wanted there, or you weren't really ready to negotiate it all. You weren't willing to give up anything. So it's really a fun activity they can engage in, but it's also one where they can learn from their peers. This is also a good one too, the wave skill. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger for you. All right, so the whole idea of this is that treat your emotion like a wave. The idea is that you will have a different, you have the thought where things are a little bit calmer, emotions start to rise, wave pushes upward, and then you have an urge to act. The idea is just to ride that emotion out. The whole idea is that for a lot of kids, when they have an emotion, especially they'll think this emotion is going to last forever. And they think they will be with this forever. And they start to identify that this is who I am, rather than just acknowledging the fact and thinking about that this is a temporary thing. And I can ride this out. A lot of kids will connect with that. Have had kids very specifically say they use this skill every single day. And it's how they get through. And that is just what I was saying before. The feelings, just like waves, are much like waves. We can't stop them from coming, but we can choose which ones to surf and which ones we want to stay with. All right. And how do I make this bigger?
I've been transformed by the very therapy that I developed. Because once I realized that I had to teach the clients acceptance, I realized at that very same moment in my own personal life, I had somehow lost my ability to accept, and that I was going to have to learn it myself. And so I ended up taking a sabbatical point or time off from my job. What I found out when I went to the first Buddhist monastery was within days I knew that I had found exactly what my clients needed. I had no doubts about it. I figured that out right away. That acceptance was exactly what they needed, but that they had a way of teaching it that I could translate. My problem was I tried to take it stock and barrel to my clients. At Shasta Abbey, the basic message was all the time to try to radically accept everything and to let go of desires and what you want. So we got jobs every single morning. And so it was the idea of practicing letting go of wanting a particular job. If you were sweeping, they would tell you when the bell rang for work to stop, they would tell you stop in the middle, because finishing is just your own thing. You're trying to do something you want to do, just let go. So it was this whole practice of just constantly, moment by moment, letting go of what you want and radically accepting what is. It was the first environment I'd ever been in. It was completely non-sexist. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I'm not kidding. It was so unbelievable. Men and women would get the same jobs. There was no real distinction. I mean, admittedly, it may not have been helpful if I hadn't just completely thrown myself into it. But since I decided ahead of time that I had to learn this, my only option was just to do everything I was told. Just throw myself in. And I was a student, so there were 8 of us. We did everything together. It was really the practice of letting go of having to have what you wanted at any moment. And the recognition that you didn't have to always have whatever it was you wanted. That had a big effect in some ways on the therapy, that in the sense that I try to teach clients, suppressing what you want is not the way to go. You have to radically accept that you want something you don't have, and it's not a catastrophe. And so I stayed there for 2 months, then I went.
All right, I'm going to stop that there. That line particularly stands out to me, that you have to radically accept this thing, and not having it is not a catastrophe. If you guys could just pause for a second and just talk to a neighbor real quick. We're going to give it just a minute, about a situation that you've encountered where you can think that you either did or didn't accept a situation, and how you might have catastrophized it, and how not doing it helped. Did that make sense? I know it's a lot of jargon in there. Just a situation that you could have where you didn't accept it, and how it worked out for you. Just a minute. This is our next, if you saw at the start, this is not a lesson we currently cover. This is our next lesson. This is as our staff has started to develop a level of comfort in delivering these ideas, this is the next push. This whole idea of radical acceptance is not something that we've currently covered. And it is also covered with this idea of willingness versus willfulness. I love this concept, because if you are too busy in your mind fighting the situation that has already happened, it is done, it is over, then that's the willfulness, versus if you're willing to engage in the current situation. If you're not willing to engage in where we are now, and you're too entrenched in the willfulness part, which means you haven't accepted what's going on. And again, the whole idea is that if you don't accept what's happening, you can't possibly improve anything. If you're stuck in your shoulds and your what might have been, what should have been, then you're really not going to be able to move forward at all. And this whole notion about, I love that line. I was trying to look at. I know it had been used in DBT before, trying to see where it came from. The only thing I could find was a line. It was a line from the Dalai Lama. But that pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. So we are all going to experience pain, but the more we refuse to accept the situation that's happening, we create suffering. And this is not about accepting things it's about accepting things that we don't like but can't change, so we can be effective in the current environment. So it doesn't mean if you accept it, doesn't mean you like it. It's just that acknowledging that you can't change that. That happened already. That's done. But what can I do to be effective right now? So that's where we're heading. That's the next step for us to be able to work with kids on. All right. This is just for right now. I'd be curious to hear, out of everything you heard tonight, what's something we started at the beginning to say, the hope is that you go back home with one idea, one skill that you could either work on with yourself or work on with your child at home, I'm curious where you're at. Other than tired, because technically it's about 10 o'clock. Yeah, Jill.
I love the whole wise mind, rich mind, and it just all makes sense. And I did it with 3 of my employees today without using those words, but it fits, it's like, it really makes sense.
Yeah.
To bring that wise mind out, because we don't go there all the time.
And sometimes it's hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to help our kids be able to find that, it's so important.
Oh. Anybody else's specific skill, like and it's helpful for other people to hear the things that you have to say, because they might not have thought about that and said, oh yeah, maybe I'll take that home too. So if there's anything, please do be brave and share anything that you're thinking about, that one particular thing. And it could be that you need to do. That's usually the best thing. It's easiest to work on us than we can, but go ahead, Amy.
I'm changing all my butts to Ann.
Yeah. It's a big invalidator. Yeah.
I'm also going to share that with my husband.
Yeah. And again, it's easier for us to do and model and say, and tell them what you're doing, and let them pick up on it. Other things that you're
I thought the wise mind as well, but I also thought being present and sort of I'm just thinking of homework. Like you said, they come from so much stuff going on, just to be in that moment and just start like that and then go from there.
Yeah.
We could all, well, I shouldn't speak for other people, but I could use that as well.
We could all use that, yes. We're always, our minds are extended in 100 different directions. And it's funny too, I always think sometimes I wonder, are we really that busy? But if we look how long have we been on our phone today? That's one of the things that we'll learn in executive functioning. That's what she calls that, identifying our time robbers. But that's a big one in terms of it's a factor of why we're always racing and why we need to get to the next place, or what happened before, or what's happening on the news or in the world or on social media, all those things that are distracting us from being right here and being present and being effective. Other things, yeah.
I like the concept of the cold, the temperature change.
Yeah.
And to incorporate that, even like a cold cloth, or put your head in the refrigerator for a moment, or something, to that matter, just changing to the cold.
Yeah. I'm going to nerd out again, and I think we have a Huberman lab that there's so much science even behind the cold exposure, quick cold exposure, even the cold shower. There's so much research on it, how it literally re-triggers your all the healing mechanisms in you and slows you down. When we talk about that lesson, I didn't share it here, but the lesson we give when we talk to kids about it, it's just like when we say, all right, so if the Wi-Fi is really sluggish in your house, what do you do? And some kids, literally, well, I start throwing things. Or I start yelling, or I start doing this, or I start doing that. So is that effective? No. What do you do if you want to be effective? You go and you reboot, you restart. That's the same thing. The cold exposure is the same thing. The cold exposure, or it could be the running in place. It could be the practice of breathing. The breathing, even for me, I was not a fan of breathing until I, number one, saw the research behind it, and number two, saw how that was turning on your parasympathetic system. And it was signaling to your brain that you don't need to be as excited right now. And so is the easiest thing to do that anybody can do anywhere. But again, students need to know why they're doing it, if they're going to do it. Other things? Any other takeaways? These are great. Yeah.
Yeah, the and but finally sunk into my head. Because you're giving two different messages at the same time.
Right.
And I never thought about it that way. But
All right.
it's
And if anything, if we can get ourselves to think about things in a different way, then it's a win. That's learning, right? Yeah.
Not being judgmental. That is the hardest one. I think the biggest significance for me to take away. Like we judge our feelings, we judge our own experiences, we judge others' feelings, others' thoughts. We try to categorize that. We're thinking that way because I think it's coming from your bias. We're really trying to put some kind of extra framework upon what they're thinking rather than there are those thoughts and there are those feelings happening
Yeah.
in ourselves.
That was very well said. So that, and if you didn't hear, that was talking about the judgment and about how hard it is both to curb your own judgment about yourself and about others, and just the language that we put to our. I mean, sometimes if you say to kids, would you, when they're talking about themselves, if that was your best friend and they did that, how would you tell them they were? They'd be like, oh, they'd be like, that's okay, it's no big deal. But you've just talked to yourself for an hour about how horrible you are and what an awful person you are. And that's another one too, where we can model for our kids that our own, how we talk about ourselves. But it's fascinating. You mentioned too, absent any facts, that's the check the facts part, we will create entire stories about what this other person is thinking and doing and feeling and why they're behaving and the way they're behaving. And we are sleuth detectives. But if we were to present that case, we wouldn't be going very far because we have zero evidence of that, or our evidence is really thin. So often we say, oh yeah, and the kids talk a lot about, well, like the one day she gave me a dirty look in the hallway and I know it was about this or about that. And it's like, oh, I didn't even see you, my mind was so elsewhere. I had this huge fight with this person and I was like, oh, upset. So it's about checking those facts and creating a different narrative in our head. And as parents, when we go home, we're not going to be able to solve this stuff overnight, but if we're asking ourselves those questions, if we're challenging ourselves, and if we're catching ourselves, that's when we put ourselves in the best situation. And help our kids too, that when we see them, especially attaching judgments to things, let's look at this as neither good nor bad, just something that happened. And how can we move beyond that? And what benefit does it do to attach the judgment to it? It's a hard thing.
Where do you want to go with that?
Right, where do you want to go with that judgment? Well, say a little bit more when you say where do you want to go with that?
Like I was kind of adding to what does that do for you? Where do you want to go with that? How do you want to now embrace that? How does that work for you? Having that thought, having those emotions, and so that they can have ownership and mindfulness about, first of all, acknowledging, and then kind of have a take about what do they want to do with that.
Okay, I like that. What do you want to do with that emotion? Yeah, where is that going to take you? And also, too, an important one, too, it talks about that we do that at Primrose, is naming that emotion. If you can name it.
Don't feel that.
Oh, right. Yeah, how can you possibly feel that way? Yeah, it's acknowledging, is this, I hear you that you're feeling this way, where do you want to be? How do you want to be with it? And sometimes people just do need a little time, space to be upset before they can come down, before they can reboot that. And some people will take a little longer to reboot their system. The key is trying to help them. One of the traps you can get into, those people, if you're constantly using those strategies to reboot, it can actually have a negative effect. The whole idea of that tip skill to reboot is only so that you can access those skills, so you can practice those skills. Get yourself into a mindset where you can say, all right, now I'm going to check the facts. If you are all upset, if you're angry, if you're stressed, you're not going to see facts in front of you. You're not going to be able to distinguish between a truth and something that you just made up. You have to be in that wise mind where you've measured the emotion and you are able to look at the facts.
Can you say the difference between CBT and DBT?
CBT, there's a whole CBT that's cognitive behavioral therapy. That there are overlays to each, especially that notion about how we think about something. That's the major focus there. DBT doesn't. DBT gets into those other especially like the tip skill, especially the interpersonal communication skill. It's a very regimented approach. And we just teach the skills within that. CBT is more that concept of that it's how you think about something is determining how you feel about it. Yeah.
But would you say that schools do DBT? There's not schools that do a CBT model.
Sure.
There are?
Yep.
Did we choose to do DBT for a certain reason?
We chose it because this isn't, and remember, we're not talking about therapy, we're talking about just these instructional lessons that are made accessible to all kids.
Are there any CBT programs out there that are made accessible for all kids?
Not lessons instructionally like this, but there's parts that anybody who has a counseling or social work or psych background will infuse different parts of each one into their work with students. This work, we've had our school psychs also work with our goal students and our SCIP students and just trim the lessons down to make them more accessible. Again, there's skills that I don't see how any adult couldn't look at this and say, these are things I need to do a little bit more. All of these lessons are on our website, on the Guidance and Counseling website. You can see I gave you a very small slice of each one, but you can go through it and there's the full videos. Really that whole idea of letting go of thoughts or not, treating your thought as a hypothesis and just a point of curiosity versus a judgment on yourself. That's a huge one. And there's a video about that with, just helping kids walk through that. But if you wanted to walk through each one and dig a little deeper, all those lessons are right there. All those PowerPoint presentations are right there. You could walk through each one. So that leads us to our next learning opportunity. So this is next week. So if you come next week to the executive functioning program, when she says the first thing you need to do is be able to engage in emotional regulation, you'll be like, I got that. I know all about it. I have all the strategies and skills. So that's next week. That's next Thursday. And this is our speaker is Kristen Jacobson from Cognitive Connections. If any of you have ever worked with Sarah Ward, she is her partner. They've created all their material together. She worked with the district last year, and she's working with us this year again to help train teachers in each building. We have small cohorts in each building that are really focused on this. And she just does a fantastic job of helping you understand how a person with executive functioning challenges thinks. I know we had somebody here last year, which really was, I think, a great starting point to it. She digs into much more specific skills and strategies and ideas. And they have this whole 360 concept that's really based around time, helping kids understand time, which you realize quickly our kids don't have a grasp of time, which one of the biggest criminals is the digital clock, believe it or not. And I don't want to give away too much, but.
Phil, I think you may have said this already. Who is being trained in the school district on the DBT?
All our secondary mental health, wellness staff. So that's every counselor, psychologist, social worker. We just finished around this because we have a few new staff this year, so we just had them. We sent them off for training. And we also added this year our student assistance counselors, since they're both full-time in the building. So they've all had DBT training. We also, I did a Tusker U for staff. So we had a handful of staff join that. The next piece that we're working on is trying to infuse it into our faculty meetings. I'd done a quick little lesson at our last CWAC of that, and the feedback was it would be good for our faculty to see this. So we were thinking, and a lot of it has to do with, if you think about it from a teaching perspective, about the assumptions and judgments you can make about the behavior of a student in front of you. About I'm drawing these conclusions about absent the facts. Again, this applies to any human being in any environment. And it can only help us treat each other better, treat ourselves better. So, yes, yeah.
The question on that, to follow up that is, so then the counselors are doing the lessons with the kids?
The counselors usually pair up with psychologists, social worker, and our health teachers too. Our health and our facts teachers have also been, not all our health teachers have been trained. I can think about half of them. We've had some changes here at this middle school especially. But yeah, so they deliver it with them, so they have the same background and knowledge. And before I change on that, I just want to, and I know I had sent along some of these just to give you a sense from where our kids are. So I'm asking you to complete this survey. I'm going to try to make that a little bigger. If you have your phones, hopefully this works. You can take a snapshot of that. But our kids complete a survey after they take this every time. I gave a little taste of it, but I just want you to hear this. And I'm going to say this, not every student is as impacted as these students, but this is what we asked the students, so if you have used it, how have you used these skills in your daily life? Here's a few quotes. Yes, I've used dialectics when arguing with my mom about things such as going to my friend's house. I realized that going to her house late is worrisome for my mom because she's trying to take her mom's perspective. Half the time when I read these, I think, what are these parents thinking when this kid comes home and is doing this, like acting so unusually? Using dialectics, I've been able to compromise with arguments because I see two sides of the argument and can adjust to to fit the needs of both sides. Yes, I've been able to use the WAVE method with recent stress that I've been feeling around schoolwork and the play that just went on. Sometimes the workload can feel a little bit overwhelming and cause me a lot of stress and pressure, which sometimes leads my emotions to completely take charge and make me feel stuck in an ocean of anxiety or anger. Yet once I acknowledge that these feelings, these kinds of emotions are normal but not permanent, just like a wave, I can manage my stress a little bit easier and feel less overwhelmed with where I'm currently at in life. And this is my favorite one. I want to put this on my wall. Yes, I have used dialectics. I have been more mindful with my words when I get into an argument with my mom or my sister. Instead of just yelling and saying that they don't understand, I have listened to what they have to say and given it thought. By using dialectics, I'm not making this up. By using dialectics, I've realized that when I get into fights with my sister, she usually has a perspective that I hadn't thought of or considered. For example, one time I was going to hang out with my friends, but my sister asked me to go to her soccer game instead. I said that I couldn't and that I'd go next weekend instead, but she got very upset about it. Before using dialectics, I thought that she was being inconsiderate and that she had no right to be upset. After using dialectics, I realized that from her perspective, I had been saying that I'd go to her next game without actually going to it for weeks now. I also realized that she goes to almost all of my games and that I had been to very few of hers. It's like, come on. So you see that and you just say, okay, we're going in the right direction. We're going in the right direction. It's going to take a lot more work and a lot more practice. And, yes, would it have been great if 2,000 parents were here? Absolutely. But we'll start here and we'll chip away. And as much as possible, you share out that this stuff is available right on the website, all these lessons. The goal is that if they see them and they're hearing about it, if you can reinforce it or reference it, that will help their memory and help them be able to employ this stuff a little bit easier. All right? And if you could snap that, and if you can, and complete that, that's very similar to the survey that our kids take. That would be great to have your feedback as well, too. There is a question in there as well, too, about any other topics that you'd love to hear about and learn about, which is very important. And that's all I've got. All right? Thanks so much.